From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Thanks for listening. Upcoming during our first half hour today, a visit with K-State's Jane Lingenfelser about the corn hybrids that rose to the top in K-State's 2018 corn performance trials around the state. The new field test report now available to you growers to study as you make your hybrid selection decisions for the 2019 growing season. Jane will list for us the hybrids that stood out region by region across Kansas, as well as the added production information that was collected in the trials. She'll be in next. Also today on this week's horticulture segment, K-State's Ward Upham will walk through the steps to winterizing lawn and garden power equipment and hand tools. And there's more coming up on this Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
We're glad to have you along for this Agriculture Today here on the K-State Radio Network. Well, it's been something of an extended ordeal finishing up the corn hybrid performance trials on the part of Kansas State University this year for fairly obvious reasons, weather-wise, but the results are now in, and during the first half of the program, we'll take the time to dive into the numbers and see which hybrids tended to perform exceedingly well this past year. Jane Lingenfelser is with us. Jane is, of course, the agronomist in charge of the crop performance tests for Kansas State University. And right to it, the results in full are now, at long last, Jane, available.
They are available on our website. That address is www.agronomy, that's agronomy.kstate.edu. And the entire 2018 Corn Book will be published as an insert in High Plains Journal magazine. That will come out in High Plains Journal about December 10th, and it will be found in Extension offices soon after that. Or it can also be found electronically at the K-State Research and Extension Digital Publications Library. And that address is www.ksre.ksu.edu/bookstore and click on crops and then corn.
So if you prefer the hard copy, it won't be long before that's out. But for right now, go electronically to one of those 2 locations and you can pull down the information. As the growing season went, and therefore the performance trials this year, well, we say this every year that there are challenges, but this year was just chock full of them.
It was, and it was amazingly similar to last year in that the state again experienced the whole spectrum of near maximum yields for corn to complete failure to set ears in some fields. In regards to the performance tests, once again, there was really no or very few statistical differences between the majority of hybrids. So it's always a good idea to look at multiple sources and multiple years for making your hybrid decisions. But this year, it's especially important because, once again, weather and the timing of weather events played a larger role in production than genetics did.
And to lend more to that, precipitation, well, we went from one extreme to the other, it seems, as the season progressed.
That's right. And this is according to Mary Knapp, the K-State climatologist. Mary provided cumulative precipitation graphs for all the locations in the performance test this year, and those can all be found in the book. And timeliness of rainfall, as I said, was very important in 2018. Overall, the state was above normal in precipitation from July 1st through October 15th. And if you remember this year, it seemed like the drought lasted forever, but we were actually up for the year. The greatest departures in precipitation were in southwest Kansas, which had 154% of normal rainfall. And the greatest shortfall occurred in east central Kansas, which was only about 92% of the normal rainfall. Northwest Kansas enjoyed the most favorable moisture distribution throughout the growing season. However, harvest in this area has been hampered by rain, and now by snow. By last account, there was about 6% of the corn crop still out in the field, and the majority of that 6% appears to be in the northwestern part of the state.
Getting closer on harvest completion, not quite there yet. We talk about this each year, that the planting date is pivotal to eventual yields, and that was certainly borne out this year, wasn't it?
It was. As in last year, planting was delayed by wet conditions in March and April, but it did catch up to the 5-year average pace in May. Overall, the corn planted in mid to late April suffered from less than ideal conditions during flowering. And then the high temperatures that occurred in early to mid-June accelerated the plant growth and left the corn exposed to the water stress and drought during the early reproduction periods. This was primarily a problem in the eastern and central parts in the state. And I looked, but I couldn't find information about the acres of corn that were chopped or cut for silage this year, but I have to believe that it was pretty substantial in the eastern part of the state.
For sure. But there was an upside to late planted corn in as far as pollination and more favorable conditions.
Right. The late planted corn reached pollination in much better weather conditions, which the drought affecting those plants during the vegetative growth rather than the reproductive periods. Later planted corn, especially in the western parts of the state that received that normal, timely amounts of rainfall, expressed close to maximum yields this year.
The interesting part, though, as you look over the climatological information, the temperature extremes were not overwhelming in as far as impacting this crop.
It was not. Temperature was not much of a factor, with the warmest reading occurring in mid-July and topping out at 112 degrees on July 21st in Ashland, Kansas, in Clark County. The biggest factor, however, with temperature was the rapid switch from the colder than normal temperature to warmer than normal. The statewide average temperature in April was the coldest since 1895, while the statewide temperatures in June were the warmest on record. Autumn freezes were about normal, the first occurring in Colby, dropping to 27 degrees on the 14th of October, and Concordia the next day, also dropping to 27 degrees. And luckily, most of the crop was fully mature when these freezes occurred, but temperature, not much of an issue this year, mainly just the lack of precipitation.
And that lack of precipitation was expressed in the form of aflatoxin. We should note that because that was a concern in those areas which were impacted by drought, you say.
Definitely. It was a very large concern in those areas affected by drought. And then later, the wet conditions in other areas favored stalk rots, which I will talk about next. The late season rain and snow delayed and continued to delay harvest in many areas of the state. However, despite the many challenges of the growing season, the USDA forecasts a corn yield of 130 bushels per acre for the state, which is actually only down 2 bushels from last year.
Really is remarkable that the fall off in bushels per acre was only 2 bushels this year after all of that.
Mm-hmm.
You do go to the trouble, as well as you put together the summary for the test report, to talk with your peers in as far as pest problems. And you mentioned diseases. You got together with the Extension row crop disease specialist at K-State to gather some thoughts on that.
Yes, and this is according to Doug Jardine. And according to Doug, the early to mid-season drought, followed by that heavy rainfall in August and September, led to an interesting complex of issues in 2018. In the areas of the state, particularly in the eastern half, that managed to set ears despite being so drought-stricken, Aspergillus ear rot infection was common, with incidence ranging from 0 to 80% in one field in Miami County. Many aflatoxin tests were above the 20 parts per million level, considered safe for human consumption, but well below the maximum usage rate of 300 parts per million. A KSU veterinarian did indicate that there were reports of aflatoxicosis in Kansas livestock, and additionally, late-season rains promoted the development of Fusarium ear rot, which produces the mycotoxin fumonisin. While the levels were generally below those considered safe for cattle, there were some fumonisin-related deaths in horses and hogs reported this year.
Very serious. And there were a couple of other major disease outbreaks in Kansas corn this year as well.
That's right. And I alluded to the fact that stalk rot losses were above average in 2018. Fusarium stalk rot was the predominant disease, but charcoal rot and anthracnose stalk rot were also reported in many fields, again in that eastern half of the state that was so drought-stricken. Other diseases of note, gray leaf spots were generally below treatable levels at tasseling when fungicide decisions are made, but increased rapidly in the late season with all the cloudy weather that came along with the rain. Overall, the losses to gray leaf spot were near the long-term average, though. There were 7 new counties added to the list confirmed to have bacterial leaf streak, bringing the state's total to 44. On the positive note, however, southern rust and Diplodia ear rot incidents and severity were significantly less than the last 2 years.
Now, what's the story on the insect side? Did we find significant damage at the hand of those pests?
We did find some, and this is reported by Holly Davis and Jeff Whitworth of Extension Entomology. According to Holly and Jeff, early season black cutworm infestations caused several fields to be replanted in southeast Kansas, and black cutworms don't usually overwinter in Kansas, but they can show up in March and April, and if their arrival coincides with cord germination, they can cause substantial stand losses, but it's usually in lower areas of the field or along the borders. Grasshoppers were a problem in pockets all over the state and proved more difficult than usual to bring under control. There were a few corn rootworm problems noted, mainly in southwest Kansas. Additionally, it was recently documented that populations of western corn rootworms have developed resistance to all commercially available corn rootworm BT events. On the positive note, however, for insects this year, since most of the eastern half of the state was chopped early, there were consequently no pest problems.
That's looking at the glass half full, for sure. So there's a quick overview of the corn production season in Kansas, and as will be reflected in the hybrid test report that Jane has put together and that you producers can consult here soon at those various locations. We'll remind you how to reach the information in a second. But Jane, after the break, we want to walk through the notes that you put together on hybrid performance region by region and some of the standout hybrids that really shone in this year's tests. If you hold on, we'll get into that in just a moment. Our guest is the agronomist in charge of K-State's crop performance tests, Jane Lingenfelser. Again, we're going over the 2018 corn hybrid performance report just out from K-State, which will continue in a moment on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
We're back now on Agriculture Today. Once more, we're joined by Jane Lingenfelser. Jane is the agronomist in charge of K-State's crop performance tests as we're reviewing the just-released report on corn hybrid performance 2018 as conducted at the various trial sites around Kansas by K-State. And Jane, you have gone to the trouble of summarizing those top performers region by region, dryland and irrigated in the state, which we'll touch upon here in just a moment. But what process do you follow to come up with this summary?
Well, I'll mention the hybrids that did well across all of the locations within a region, or the ones that showed that they did very well in a stress location this year. And this is by no means the complete list of hybrids that yielded well. As I mentioned in the beginning, there were no overarching patterns in regards to agronomic practices or hybrid traits to the 2018 corn growing season. And we put the same maturity checks in all testing locations. And at some, the early and late maturing hybrids did better, while at others, the medium maturing check was the highest yielding. So there were just no real patterns. Also, keep in mind that hybrids tended to perform similarly especially in the irrigated trials where water was not a limiting factor. We can only say that a hybrid is better than another if the yields differ by more than the LSD value, which are provided at the end of each table. So I'll again emphasize that it's important to judge hybrids and make your production decisions using as many sources and years of data that you can find. And I'd also like to say thanks to DeKalb and Pioneer for, again, supplying the maturity check seeds this year.
Can't say too many times that one does need to check multiple sources, multiple years as they go about hybrid selection. But this information will lend to that data that producers can lean on in making their hybrid choices this year. Let's begin in the northeast area of Kansas and the dryland tests at 3 locations, you say?
Yes, we had Severance in Donovan County, Manhattan in Riley County, and Onega in Pottawatomie County. These all are a corn-soybean rotation. Severance had an excellent season this year with an average of 260 bushels. Onega, however, was very water-stressed, so the average across the region was 178 bushels. And the hybrids that did well in the Northeast dryland region, Midland 669 PR did well, New Tech 5 FB 3113, and Rank RK 842 Smart Stacks did well in the Northeast dryland region.
Northeast irrigated then. Once more, 3 sites.
Yes, Manhattan in Riley County, Scandia in Republic County, and Topeka in Shawnee County. Again, a corn-soybean rotation. The average across this region was 224 bushels. As I mentioned briefly, the hybrids in the irrigated test tended to do fairly similarly. So again, look at all the sources of information that you can find. But the good performers for the Northeast irrigated region, Hefty H6424 did well. LG Seeds LG 5643 Smart Stacks did well. Midland 669 PR. New Tech 5 FB 4516. More Corn MC 4725 VT2 Pro, and Phillips PSF 098 did well in the Northeast irrigated region.
Moving then on to the eastern Kansas dryland sites. Once more, you had 3 viable test locations there as well.
Yes, Rossville in Shawnee County, Ottawa in Franklin County, and Erie in Neosho County. These were 3 tough locations. The range at Rossville was 70 bushels to 156 bushels, which is kind of unheard for performance tests, but that's what we had to deal with. The average across the whole region was 131 bushels. These all followed soybeans. And the good performers in the East Dryland, again, very stressed region, Midland 656 PR did well. More Corn MC 4457 VT2 Pro did well. And DeKalb DKC 6069 did well at Rossville.
Very important to compare apples to apples in this region, though, because, as you noted earlier, that was the most drought-stressed area of Kansas.
Yes,
across
very
the
much
board
so.
This year.
Yes.
So, and in central Kansas, then, you had 2 sites originally, but you had to abandon one.
We did. We had to abandon Assaria in Saline County. That was one location that had pretty incomplete ear set, and the variability was much too high to report. So we were left with Belleville in Republic County. The yields at Belleville averaged 92 bushels. The average was 45 to 137 at Belleville. And the good performers at this, again, drought-stricken location, LG Seeds, LG 64C18 VT2 did well. Phillips PSF 133, Rank RK 961 VT2 Pro, and the early maturity check from Pioneer did well in the central region.
And we must note as well, you did conduct a couple of short-season hybrid trials in the eastern part of the state.
We did. We had Ottawa in Franklin County and Parsons in Lebec County. These both followed soybeans. These are both 108-day hybrids or shorter. Parsons was particularly hard hit. I don't think we had any hybrids that yielded over 100 bushels, and that left the average of 92 for the short season region. But the hybrids that did well in the short season region, New Tech 5H905, DeKalb DKC 6069, and More Corn MC 3544 VT2 Pro did well.
Well, we do see improved numbers as we check out the South Central irrigated tests, which you would expect.
Yes, we had Moundridge in McPherson County, Maxville in Stafford County, and Hutchinson in Reno County. The timely rains greatly boosted Moundridge and Maxville. According to the cooperator in Maxville, he irrigated probably less than half of the normal amount this year because of the rains. The average for South Central irrigated was 222 bushels. And the hybrids did well here. New Tech E5FN A714, also Phillips PSF 098, and LG Seeds LG 5700 VT2 did well in the South Central irrigated region.
Well, Jane, perhaps the most intriguing part of the test this year was what resulted from the dryland trials in western Kansas. You achieved numbers that just aren't normal for that part of the state.
We did. We had Hayes in Ellis County, Colby in Thomas County. In the past, we have had a test at Garden City in Finney County. This year, we did not have enough entries to have a test. However, we, ironically, could have probably supported a corn crop there this year. Right. Colby enjoyed very timely rains. The dryland yields are really not too far off from the irrigated yields, about 20 bushels lower. But the average across the West dryland region was 120 bushels, which is quite good for this year. And our well-performing hybrids rank RK842 Smart Stacks, also DeKalb DKC 6069. The early check from Pioneer did well in the western dryland location, and Phoenix 6542A4 did well in the western dryland region.
And lastly, tell us how the hybrids performed in the western Kansas irrigated trials at 3 sites.
Yes, we had Colby in Thomas County, Tribune in Greeley County, and Garden City in Finney County. The hail events that I mentioned in the beginning in May caused some degree of green snap and lodging, especially at Colby. That information can be found on our website at www.agronomy.ksu.edu/services/crop performance test. I have the notes on the green snap that occurred at Colby. The average for the western irrigated region was 200 bushels, and our good performers there, LG Seeds, LG 5643 VT2, and LG 66C32 Smart Stacks did well. New Tech 5 FB 4516, Phoenix 1121 EZ, BH Genetics BH 8737 VT2 Pro did well. And finally, Ag Venture and Experimental EXP 164048 AM did well in the western irrigated region.
Very well. Well, each and every one of the corn hybrids entered into the 2018 trials are fully covered in the results that are in the Hybrid Test Performance Report out from K-State, plus other information you hinted about the green snap ratings. But there's much, much more on top of the yield performance numbers.
That's right. We also had the list of the seed treatments. These are all provided by the company, also the growing degree days, herbicide, disease, and insect-resistant traits. And those are all available online at www.agronomy.ksu.edu/services/crop performance tests, or at the KSRE bookstore site. That address is ksre.ksu.edu/bookstore, and click on corn. And the hard copies will be available of the 2018 Kansas Performance Test with Corn Hybrids in the High Plains Journal magazine very soon.
Be looking for all of that. And Jane, it's probably a good feeling to have this corn hybrid test behind you.
Very much so.
Because of all the obstacles.
Waiting on the soybeans.
Waiting on that and grain sorghum. And we hope to have you back to cover those numbers when they are finally pulled together. Appreciate your time right here.
Thank you.
Jane Lingenfelser, our guest on Agriculture Today. She is the agronomist in charge of K-State's crop performance tests. And they're a quick synopsis of the Corn Hybrid Performance Report for this year, now available to you producers. You're listening to the K-State Radio Network. Stay with us.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local Extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're tuned in to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Welcome back. Eric Atkinson here. Now today's agricultural news headlines for you, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, House Agriculture Committee Chairman Michael Conaway said late last evening that he and the other Agriculture Committee leaders have reached an agreement in principle on the Farm Bill, but there are more details to be worked out. Agreement on some sticky issues appears to have been reached that could get the Farm Bill completed yet this year. Conaway's statement was important because Senate Agriculture Committee Chairman Pat Roberts, Senate Agriculture Ranking Member Debbie Stabenow, and House Agriculture Ranking Member Colin Peterson had all issued statements earlier yesterday indicating that agreement was in hand, while Conaway remained silent at that time. After a hearing yesterday morning, Roberts and Stabenow told reporters that they are closer than ever to finishing the Farm Bill Conference report. They noted that the congressional leadership has settled the issue of what, if any, forestry provisions will be included in the bill. They also said the Congressional Budget Office still has to figure out how much the various provisions will cost. The overall bill, including nutrition provisions that make up most of the spending, is expected to cost about $900 billion over 10 years. Now, the Senate and House top leaders did resolve the forestry question reportedly Tuesday evening. That, according to the senators as well, the issue had been bumped up to the leadership level because the issues were broader than those over which the agriculture committees have jurisdiction. Roberts said that there was not a time to write a major forestry provision and that forestry would be a minimum bill, as he put it. Stabenow noted that forestry had sometimes been handled outside of the Farm Bill. Neither of them was willing to say whether forestry would be handled in the Farm Bill or in separate legislation. They were also unwilling to go into any other specifics, such as whether the question of payment limitations on farm subsidies has been settled. Members of the mostly Republican Congressional Western Caucus had been pushing for inclusion of House-passed provisions that would make it easier to clear forest floors and to thin forests, but environmentalists said those proposals would lead to questionable logging practices. Stabenow said Monday that the bill could not pass the Senate if the House provisions were included. Later in the day, Roberts said it would be premature to describe the deal as final because, in his words, there are still some things out there that people have to agree on. We're not at a place where I can say that there's a full agreement. That, according to a report from Politico. At their meeting with reporters, both Stabenow and Roberts said that the process has been typical for farm bills. And when they were asked what they want this Farm Bill to be known for, Stabenow said getting it done with no extension of the current Farm Bill. Pressure continues to escalate on agricultural appropriators over the USDA's plan to relocate the Economic Research Service and National Institute of Food and Agriculture, with another letter sent by a group of agricultural education leaders and scientists. Quoting that group in their letter, we write from the perspective of current and former University Agricultural Administration leaders and former USDA chief scientists. The proposed relocation of the ERS and NIFA outside of the Washington, D.C. region and realignment of ERS, they say in their letter, will undermine our food and agriculture enterprises by disrupting and hampering the agency's vital work in support of it, in their words. They also took issue with the pace of the proposed changes, questioning why such a major upheaval of the USDA research arm would be carried out with such haste, as they said, and without the input and prior consultation of the USDA research stakeholders. Given those concerns, they're asking the agricultural appropriators to intervene to stop the restructuring, at least until there's been a comprehensive independent study and full consultation with the stakeholder community. And the EPA is reportedly set to freeze its small refinery waiver program in the renewable fuel standard pending a review. Reuters reported yesterday that the agency program that granted 48 such waivers in 2016 and 17, totaling some 2.25 billion gallons of biofuels not blended in gasoline, currently is frozen and under review by EPA and the U.S. Department of Energy. They were citing unnamed sources. Refining interests have maintained EPA had no other choice but to grant waivers because of previous court rulings. So far in 2018, the agency has not approved any of the 15 waiver requests that it has received. Next up for you on Agriculture Today, this week's edition of the Kansas Soybean Update. And with that is Greg Akagi. Greg?
Lewis Bainbridge is joining us, a South Dakota soybean producer, and serves as the chair of the United Soybean Board. Lewis, a very exciting time, really looking at good partnerships, and one occurred in the month of November between United Soybean Board, National Corn Growers Association, and the National Pork Board.
We are very, very thankful we had the opportunity for our three organizations to capitalize and validate what we have been doing in the past and to move forward together, leveraging farmer checkoff dollars in a good way.
And the importance seems to be always magnified on that, and specifically for the partnership you had, because that consumer, that person out there, that's the customer too, is wanting to know more things like that about the products that each of you raise.
The ultimate consumer, in this case, the mom that buys that pork chop, she wants to know that that pork was raised in a sustainable manner and a very good manner, but she also wants to know that the feed that that animal consumed was raised in a sustainable manner, and being very sensitive to water use, water quality, and other sustainable practices.
Because so much of it in developing these partnerships is what the consumer hears and what the consumer needs to hear from those farmers, from the organizations like USB.
Each one of our three organizations has been doing work in that arena, so now we want to benchmark where we are in the organizations and then to determine what is needed, what that consumer truly wants to know, and be able to give them the truthful answer.
Does it come down to a matter of trust or increasing that trust from that consumer to people in agriculture?
I think the consumer has for a very, very long time trusted the farmers and what they tell them. And I think we're still there, but I think now that there wants to be some verification of that to validate that trust, if you will. So I think that this is important that we are truly working together.
Are you looking at other partnerships here in the future to try and to develop?
We're certainly open to other partnerships, absolutely, because most of us farmers, I grow corn. I also am involved in the hog business. So, yes, we are cross-pollinated, if you will.
Lewis, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
And thank you so much for what you folks do. We appreciate that also.
Lewis Bainbridge is joining us, a South Dakota soybean producer, and serves as the chair of the United Soybean Board. He joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
And Greg Akagi there. Many thanks to you, Greg. We will return after this break. You're tuned to Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. We're back now on Agriculture Today, and we set aside this time every Thursday to get into horticultural topics. And what better thing to discuss as we endure these winter weather conditions than to ready your lawn and garden tools for the next growing season. Great project for this time of the year. Along with us now is K-State Research and Extension horticulturist Ward Upham with some handy tips along that line. And we'll break this down into two segments, Ward. First, on that power equipment, which is so handy in lawn and garden management, but needs a little TLC in preparation for next year.
It certainly does. What most people do is wait until the spring and then worry about it, and that's not a good idea. Because if something does go wrong, usually you're at the last minute, and you either have to get it fixed or you have to get parts, and it just slows you down. At this time of year, even if you have to get it worked on, the people that work on it are not busy, and they can get it done and get it back to you in good time. So there's a number of steps you need to look at when you look at taking care of your power equipment. One is the gas. You either need to run it completely out of gas, or you need to add a gas stabilizer. Gas deteriorates over time. And if you don't do that, the next spring, that equipment may be very hard to start. It kind of gums up the carburetor. And so you may have to have the carburetor worked on if you don't do this. Mm-hmm. And so make sure you take care of that. Even if this is the only thing you do, this is the most important thing to do, just to make sure that the equipment's going to start the next year.
And draining that gas tank may be the easiest. And that can be accomplished usually at the filter. You can disconnect the gas line there, do it that way.
Yeah, and if you're almost out, you can just run it for a while. I mean, there's different ways of doing that. Just make sure there's no gas left in that carburetor. Yeah. Second thing is drain the oil. Now, if you've run that equipment, that engine's going to be warm anyway. It just makes that oil drain a whole lot quicker. Everything that's in there is suspended, and so you get rid of all that bad stuff that's there. And then make sure you add new oil. Don't leave it dry over the winter. You may forget that it's dry. And so make sure you add the right amount of oil, and then it'll be ready for the next spring. Next thing is the air filter. A lot of people don't even think about that, but I have seen examples where people have a mower that won't start. The only problem is that air filter is so plugged up that it can't get any air.
And it's out of sight, out of mind, so people don't consider it.
That's right. And often there's what we call a foam pre-filter over the regular air filter. So make sure you clean both of those and then put them back on. If it needs to be replaced, replace it. But often you just blow them out and they're going to be fine. But keep that in mind. That needs to be clean for that machine to work well.
That foam filter often can be cleaned with a detergent. That's not a bad idea?
That's not a bad idea. So just you mix up a little bit of dishwashing soap with water and then clean it, allow it to dry, and then you put it back on. So easy process.
Other things to consider, well, spark plugs, they wear quite regularly, so one might want to think about at least checking that out.
Yeah, at least checking it, and they're fairly cheap. I mean, if you want to replace them every year, that's not a bad idea. What a lot of people also do is use some sprayable oil and put it into that cylinder before they replace the spark plug. And make sure you get everything tightened the right way. Make sure you hook up the wire again. So again, when you try to start in the spring, it's going to start right up.
All of these tips for tillers, for lawn mowers, but specifically to the mower, ideal time to sharpen those blades and be ready to go next spring.
Yeah, and if you have to replace them, you can do that. But also just make sure that you clean any tines if you have a tiller. Make sure you clean the underside of that deck. That can build up over time, and it can be kind of difficult to get all that stuff off. So make sure you clean all that stuff off. Some people put a light film of oil on the underside of the deck. That prevents it from building up for a while. Not for the whole season, so it does help for a while. Also check if you have equipment that needs antifreeze or if it has hydraulic fluid. Be sure that you check those. Check your tire pressure. Bring that up to spec so that machine is going to be ready to go that next year. Another thing that I do is I'll order a whole new set of filters for everything I have so that if something happens, I've got it right there. I don't have to wait for it to be ordered and then delivered. Right. And so that can really help speed things up also.
Or if you'd rather, as you said, your local service center can do all of this for you.
They certainly can. At this time of year, they're not going to be too busy. And so you can get that equipment in and get it back in a timely manner. You wait till spring, you may have a whole bunch of people ahead of you that are in just as much a hurry as you are. And you have to sit and wait. And so it's just a good idea to take care of all that stuff now.
Yeah, be proactive in that sense. The other side of this would be those hand tools, particularly in the garden, hose, rakes, whatever it might be. And one should maybe give them a little extra care at this time of the year as well.
Right. Just clean them up, make sure they're clean, and then put a light film of oil over them. I mean, just squirt them with a little oil, use a rag in order to make sure everything's covered that's metal. And then look at the handle as well. A lot of people don't even think about that, but over time, the grains in that wood can start to almost pop out. And so if they need a light sanding, give them a light sanding, and then put some sort of wood preservative over them so that it'll protect it for that next year. Those tools are expensive. Mm-hmm. And so you want to do everything you can in order to make them last as long as possible.
On the handles, just a standard wood preservative product?
Yeah, you can use something like linseed oil or a polyurethane. Either one of those will work fine. Mm-hmm. And so make sure that you wipe it off after a while, just because that oil is going to attract dirt. And so make sure that it's, you may leave it on for a day or two and then wipe it off, make sure that it's clean.
And then store those tools away in a good, secure spot.
Yes, that's a good idea. You don't want, with the blizzard that we just had, we had moisture all the way inside our garage. And so you may, if you didn't treat those tools right, you're going to have rust in not too long. And so make sure, if you can, have them in a spot where they're not going to come in contact with the elements.
And the point is, and you've said this many times before, if one takes care of their hand tools routinely, they will last for a long, long while. They're quite well built.
Yes, they are.
So keep this in mind. It's something that you can do during one of these more inclement weather days or multiple days, which we'll likely have in the wintertime, and that is caring for your lawn and garden equipment, be it power equipment, be it hand tools. Do take those necessary steps. Ward, as always, thank you for coming over.
You bet.
He's Ward Upham, horticulturist, K-State Research and Extension, and be sure to keep track of these and other topics in the horticultural newsletter that's posted weekly out of K-State, and you can find that by simply searching for K-State Horticulture Newsletter. Well, once again, our time is away, and we appreciate you being along with us on this Thursday. Please rejoin us right here this same time, same place on your radio dial tomorrow. Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.